Root square roots of negatives, right? So, I gave you guys a new worksheet on the max and min problems. And then you realize in number 1, this was easy cheesy, right? Because if you just took out your h and your k, you saw it was negative 1 to 4. Axis of symmetry, just steal the x of the h. And the zeros, you went ahead and actually did the work in solve, solve, solve without me going through and doing that solve, solve, solving. You guys ended up with x equals negative 3 and 1, which wasn't a big deal because then you graphed a point there, and you graphed a point there, and you graphed your vertex at negative 1, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so there it is. So on number 2, what did you do as your vertex? 2, 3. Your axis of symmetry was x equals 2. Your zeros, you went to solve, but what ended up happening when you set the whole shebang equal to 0? Yeah, you were supposed to get plus or minus square root of negative 3. No, negative 6, right? So you move the 2 first. So you would have had, if you solved for the zeros, you could have said 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 6, which could have been, Joseph, I think you were the one doing this, right? What did you write down? 2 plus or minus?
I put a little I in there.
Good. An I with the root 6, you could have done that. And you could write those as your zeros. Technically, you're right. The imaginary numbers we haven't reviewed yet. But you could say, instead of saying x equals negative 3, 1, or you could have written the points negative 3, 0, 1, 0. You could have said x equals 2 plus or minus I root 6, but the dilemma is when we go to graph, we can't graph imaginary because it's not really there, right? So what do we do? Put the 2, 3 and just say whatever, I'm just going to swoop it, and I know it's a positive, so it must be a swoop up? No, that's not good enough. We need 3 points, so how do we find it? Graphing calculator, well that's lame. Nope, not that either. Plug in, and what x values might be smart ones to plug in? How about 1 and 3? Because it straddles 2, right? We have 2, 3. We just knew the other 2, we would know how narrow or how wide to make it. Or you could plug in maybe 0. Wouldn't that be an easy one to plug in? If we plug in 0, maybe we only have to plug in 1. Guys, what happens when you plug in 0? 0 minus 2, negative 2. Squared is 4. 4 over 2 is 2 plus 3 is. Did anybody find that the intercept is 0, 5? The y-intercept. X-intercept is imaginary. Why was that all we really needed to do? Parabolas are what? Symmetric. So if I know that x goes over 2 and up 2, can't I also go that x goes over 2 and up 2? Maybe I only need to find one other point, and that it was as hard as plugging in 0. Does that make sense? Okay. So we can make a precise graph. We don't have to necessarily work super hard at it. For parabola, you should be able to find the vertex from vertex form, and if there are no real zeros, which is true because this does not cross through the x-axis, all we need to do is find 1 point and keep the symmetry on the other side. Swoop, there it is. Number 3. What did you guys figure out? What's your vertex? Negative 3, 5. Good. Axis of symmetry, x equals zeros. What happened when you plugged in y equals 0?
Y. X equals negative 3 plus or minus square root of 1.5.
Yeah. Does that agree with yours, Colby? Right. Increase.
Vertex would be
Yes. I apologize. I think I just wrote what I thought I heard. You guys had negative 5 also, right? Mm-hmm. Good. What's messy about those zeros? Oh, I need my calculator. I can't possibly do that by hand. Hold on. What is 5 halves? 2.5. How would you approximate the square root of 2.5 if you had to make a guess? not 0.5. It's bigger than square root of 1, which is 1. It's bigger than 1. But it's less than square root of 4, which is 2. So isn't it something in between 1 and 2? If you want to be super snazzy, you can say, okay, well, the numbers between 1 and 2, I have, or no, sorry, between root 1 and root 4, I have 2 and 3 is kind of closer to the 3. I bet it's even over 1.5. I don't know, 1.62. I just guessed something. What is it? Square root of 2.5. Probably 1 point even higher. Ah, 1.62 is better. Okay. Long story short, it's 1 point something. And how do we approximate 1 point on a graph? Doesn't really matter too much, right? So we could go ahead and just guess 1.5. We could guess 1 point anything. What would be negative 3 plus 1.5-ish? Ooh, negative 3 plus 1.5. Yeah, negative 1.5. So negative 1 point, I don't know, something. Put a something. What's negative 3 minus 1.5? There you go. Then you should have your negative 3 being somewhere in the middle. That was at negative 5? Whatever, it's close. Swoop, there it is. Right? It's close. You guys are capable of more than you think you are. You might not have guessed 1.5, but you should have guessed 1 point something. That's the point. You should have guessed 1 point something. Root 5 over 2 is root 2.5, which is bigger than root 1, less than root 4, something in between 1 and 2. Pick a decimal and just go for it. You're probably not going to be super precise when you graph it anyway. How bad was 1, 2, and 3?
Not that bad.
Not that bad. They had to kind of get the hang of it. The imaginary thing might have kind of tricked you a little bit. You might have been a little bit lazy on your graphs, but it shouldn't have been awful, awful, awful. What's going on in 4 through 6? Ooh, why is it a lot more? Not a lot more. Wow. Why is it a little bit more? You have to change the form. Or use your h equals negative b all over 2a, plug it in and find the y. But what are these different questions asking? Let's go ahead and just do number 4 together. We're practicing completing the square. Those of you that want to try to do the x equals negative b all over 2a, you're going to beat me because as long as you do it carefully, I'm going to show the steps I'm doing and not just speed demon it like I did yesterday. How would we complete the square to try to get this into standard form? Where we can see the vertex? Because it was awful nice up there. What's step number 1? We are going to set equal to 0 maybe eventually down here, but not yet. Factor out the leading coefficient of 1. And is the plus 18 good the way he is? Probably not, so we separate him as well. Now, if you want, could you try to factor him at the beginning for the zeros eventually? You could if you wanted to. You could go ahead and pull out the 2 and get x squared plus 6x plus 9. Does that factor? It doesn't just factor, it factors nicely. What is x squared plus 6x plus 9 factor? X plus 3 squared. So this is a square just by nature of the beast? Inherently so? Maybe you don't have to complete the square on this one. Because maybe, just by factoring, you would have figured out he is a perfect square. He's one of the rare ones. But just to make sure you know how to complete the square, we would have at this point gone ahead and said, hey, what would make this a squared? If you take half of 6, what's that special term that's going to be in here? Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So 9 is what I fill in, but what would I put out here if I'm trying to do my nice trick and keeping it all on one side? Yeah, don't make the same mistake I did, right? It would be minus 18. Oh, yeah, that is true. It already was a perfect square. There wasn't really any changing that we had to do. Craziness. So what's the vertex, guys? -3 and 0. it just cancels out, 0 is my k. No.
Why did you subtract 18?
This was a question I think Jacob asked yesterday. There are two different variations to complete the square. One is to add the 9 in here, and what I do to one side, I do to the other. So I could have added the 18, remember it's 9 times 2. I could have added that to this side, but what would I have had to have done eventually? Subtracted it. So instead of adding it to one side and then subtracting it, I've kind of gotten to the point where I just want to go fast. So I just put the minus on the same side instead of adding to the other, but both ways are good. Both ways are good. How do I answer the next blank? What do you guys think, a max or a min? Why? Because a positive coefficient, it's a concave up parabola, and every concave up is going to have a min. Good. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. What's the of and what's the at? What's the lowest value? Lowest, isn't that a range? What's the lowest value the function, y value, function value, has? And where does it happen? This is really important wording, just important in higher math in general. If you're talking about a function value, that value is a y. And if you're saying where or when it occurs, that's an x. And that even kind of comes or goes back to chapter 1, where I asked you when a function is increasing or decreasing, and you had to tell me x's to tell me where it was happening at. Anyway, important wording, kind of confusing when you first see it. But the of is the y value, the at is the x value. What would we say as far as our zeros? Yeah, if you set equal to 0, divide by the 2 still 0, square root still 0, all you have is negative 3. So this is one of those weird ones where it actually hits at the x-axis if we were to graph it, which you guys technically don't have to, I didn't tell you you did. But it's one of those weird ones that only hits once. So a parabola can cross through an axis, look at number 2, no times, or can cross through, look at numbers 1 and 3, 2 times, or look at number 4, can cross through only once, right? All right, let's go ahead and take a second. Well, you guys can do number 5 real quick, right? Get another homework problem done? Ready, set, go. I tried to race you, but then you guys aren't making mistakes. What would you, what you put in is a negative 16, but you have to do the opposite sign. So the addition is negative. Does that make sense? Because if you'd done it on the other side, you would have had to make that one a negative and then add it. If you guys try that whole factoring thing at the beginning, was that a good idea or a bad idea? Yeah. Can you factor 11 to make 8? Just checking.
Why'd you put positive 16?
Good question. Remember how we have to watch out for the mistake that I made yesterday? Struggle. I need it to be the opposite of what I have. In Melanie's question, I could have put a negative 16 on the other side, but what would you have to do when you brought it over? Add it. Yeah.
Let's say plus or minus on like a negative x. Like on the first.
I pulled out a negative, so then it was a negative x squared minus 8x. And I put in a plus 16, so I need it to be a perfect square. So even though this is a minus, I needed this to be a plus. And then since that was a negative, Colby's question is I had to make this the opposite. So instead of subtracting on this side, I had to add on this side. And the 11 just stayed. I got the vertex to be 4, 5. Do you guys agree? Positive 4, because it was x minus 4. Do you guys see where the 16 came from just to begin with? Cut the 8 in half and then square it. I like completing the square where in order to get this number, I actually end up building my next step. It's faster for me. But some of you have learned the trick, take this, cut in half, negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4, square it 16, and then think of the factor. And it takes an extra mental step, but it's not bad. But what would you guys answer for the whole max min thing? Why? It's concave down because I have a leading coefficient that's negative, right? So it is going to be a max, that's good. How did you guys fill in the of and the at? Of 5 at x equals 4. And how do you find the zeros? Just like we did in 1 through 3. How do we find the zeros of the nasty ones in like 2 and 3? Plugged in 0. You don't even have to remember quadratic formula if you're really good at complete the square. So all you gotta do is say, hey, let's just set this whole thing equal to 0. Then aren't you gonna subtract the 5, divide by a negative? Maybe I should actually show work this time, I apologize. Subtract the 5, divide by a negative is a positive 5. Plus or minus square root both sides. And then add the 4. If you want to be super snazzy, maybe you could even give me what decimal you would guess to be root 5. It's bigger than root 4, it's less than root 9. What do you guys think? Give me a random decimal. 2 point what? Sure, I agree. 2 point something. 2.1, 2.2, probably something a little bit higher. It is 2.7, we checked it. Oh, interesting. Let's say 2 point something small. Ooh, careful. Yes, until I divide by a negative. You see it? Sorry, I did 2 steps at once. I subtracted and divided by a negative. Then I plus or minus square rooted, then I added 4. Now, real quick, just on the, well, don't put this on your worksheet unless you really want to. How else would you have had to have found this 0 if I didn't teach you how to complete, well, review with you how to complete the square? A equals negative 1, B equals 8, C equals negative 11, X equals negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4A, C, oops, all over 2A. And what would you have had to have done to make it look like that? Well, tons of simplifying, right? Could you have done it? Hopefully. But maybe if you just get really good at complete the square, this becomes irrelevant. (64) minus a positive 44 ends up being 20, all over negative 2. 20 ends up being a radical that we can simplify to be 2 root 5, all over negative 2. I need to divide the negative 8 by the negative 2, which is a 4. I need to divide technically. I don't want to teach you guys something wrong. Hold on. No killing kittens. I don't want you to think I did. There we go. Ironically, plus or minus a negative is the same thing as plus or minus. That's why it doesn't really change. Whew. What would you rather do? This or that? I don't know. I like complete the square better if you could just get good at it. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, we're pausing before the next page because the next page it gets fun. Open up your notes. Good job, guys. Half the worksheet's already done. And we reviewed a lot of the stuff you did in homework last night, right? We're coming back to it, and maybe you'll get to have more done or get more done. But just a couple notes left, sorry. I did go ahead and put this worksheet under your handouts in your folder, just so that you know it's there in case you lose it or something. But otherwise, we should be good. Besides that, who are you? This is you. Sorry, I know who you are. I meant where are your notes. Okay, question. Do you you really need me to talk through much of any of this? Nope, so get down what you need. Ready, set, go. Get down what you need. We know, and you had to review, the concavity is based on the sign of the leading coefficient, right? The concavity, you don't even need to write opens upward, opens downward. If you want to just say opens upward. Isn't that the same thing as just concave up? Isn't opens downward the same thing as concave down? Think of it, if you're a positive person, hopefully you smile some of the time. Concave up. If you're a negative person, you're probably frowning part of the time. Concave down to frown. Write what you need. This one's just saying when A is positive, when A is negative, you're going to have concave up. When A is positive, concave down. When A is negative. Maybe you need to write that's the same thing as the leading coefficient. Maybe you already know that. But we already talked about how the vertex is HK from standard form completing the square. Or remember, you could also think of it as negative B all over 2A, and then plugging negative B all over 2A into the function. I think I still like complete the square better. Because he helps me find zeros too, without the quadratic formula. And you guys, just by process of elimination, and maybe from last night practicing in homework, you were able to answer when there was a max and when there is a min. Which one goes where? If A is less than 0, max or min? Max. Some of you, naturally, and it makes sense, would have answered min, because you see the less than, you think lower, you think min, but lower means concave down, which has a max. I always try to think of what picture I'm working with, and that helps a lot. So then if A is greater than 0, it's backwards what your brain would naturally jump to. It's a min. If you can just get your brain to visualize what parabola that's referring to. Does that make sense, guys? And then what did I say is the hint that seemed to help for the axis of symmetry? It always happens at? Yeah, at x equals h. And just like with the h, you can say that's the same thing as x equals negative b all over 2a. That's not a bad double check. I don't dislike the quadratic formula, to be honest. I taught Algebra 1 last year to older students that in some way, shape, or form might struggle with math or attention or problem solving or tests. I literally said, if you could memorize this formula, you can find me any zeros and any factors. Some of them like that, and they memorized it really well. I don't mind the quadratic formula, but for you guys, I don't think you need it. Does that make sense? And some of you still could not quote it to me, even if I asked you to sing it. It still wouldn't be there. You're like, ah, da, 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 oh, no. So if you can't even do it, isn't it better to know a process that you can always repeat and you can always copy rather than a formula that theoretically, if you had it memorized, it would be helpful? And some of you are bad at radicals, and so that just makes a whole other trouble, a whole other dilemma. Okay, those, I don't know if we really need this because we have the worksheet.
No.
So why don't you just tell me what to do? You don't even have to write it if you don't want to. You tell me and then I'll grade you and see if we got it right. I'm not going to change anything. Just
It's fine.
I'm like,
It's fine.
Okay, wait, you guys.
I've heard this and I've heard this.
There we go. Yeah, down that edge. Plus 4. Plus 4 in that blank, and then minus 8. No. Yeah, in that blank is the first blank, you do plus 4.
Plus 4.
And then you do the other one is minus 8. And then you're done.
It's plus 16.
2x Two.
Now it's gonna be
Why
more.
are they-
Hey, stop.
Two times more.
Never
You should have just done it yourself. Okay.
Minus one.
Minus one. There we go.
Boom.
Where do you get the 16 at then?
Someone else yelled 16.
And then instead of the
Equals y.
Equals.
Yeah.
Birthday.
Equals 0.
Where's the y? Box that.
0.
What's the birthday?
Dude, we already tried that. That didn't work.
Axis.
Actually,
Negative 2. X equals negative 2.
got it.
no graph.
Now high five.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't it say it's negative 1?
It says sketch the graph.
Two last one. This final was 0.
Negative 2, negative 1.
5 to 0.
You know the slope.
It's $20 times 2, they just go 2
Plug in,
squares up.
plug in
0.5,
1.
I think.
Should you be
I
taking
just did 3, 9, 15 minus 1.
17.
Wait, whoa.
Just yelling out stuff.
Negative 1.5.
No, plug in 1. 1 plus 2, 3 times 2, 9 times 2.
I'm listening to you now. I'm ignoring all of you. Now, well.
Stand by 117 is my point.
She told me to define the zeros, so I said equals 0. No, you
A
didn't.
lot of things too, but.
Let's see to Patricia.
Squared. 2 plus 1.
Oh, plus and minus.
She said subtract the 2. I promise I'm following. I'm not just doing.
Yeah, so oh.
Graph it where?
Slower.
He was
too long for yesterday too.
I'm really bad at figuring. Do more damage.
It's like
That's like point zero.
Colby, just do it.
Point
You have your calculator next to you. Come on.
Oh, that's 0.05.
No point.
0.
No. Point.
Kevin said 0.02 something. I'm using that.
Wait.
What?
No, 0.707.
0.7.
To go bigger, to go smaller, that's crazy.
It is crazy because 1/4 is 1/2 squared. So when you square 1/2, it actually gets smaller. That is crazy. I agree. That's weird.
Well, that was intense.
That's weird.
Yeah, that was intense.
Whew. All right. Well, let me grade you. I heard something about a plus 16. Let's talk about really quickly why that wasn't right. Remember, and shh, no judging. So coming back,
Thanks, everyone.
there was a lot of funny stuff said towards the end. I don't know where you guys are going with that. And then someone just wanted to do the negative b all over 2a thing, but you guys totally squelched that. You were like, no, we're not having it. So good job. Good job. It could have worked. Negative b would be negative 8 all over 2a over 4 would have been negative 2. You would have gotten, then you would have had to plug in and then simplify and got negative 1. But remember, when we go to complete the square, we take the middle term, we cut it in half, which someone had me do, and that's going to be the part that fills the perfect square, the factoring of the perfect square. And so we took half of 4, which was 2, then we squared 2, which was 4. We're disregarding this until we go to fill in the outer. Does that kind of make sense? So we took half of that, 2, squared that, which is 4, and that's how we went ahead and solved. Okay. Whew. Well, we got there. Took us a little bit of time, but question, Ryan.
Alright, so if you do negative b over 2a
Yeah.
Squared for the equation, then you get the 4, I get that.
Yeah.
But then in the next one, in the next step, it's x plus 2. I thought it would be minus 2.
Oh, remember the vertex form is x minus h. So this would have been, this would have been h. It is x, but it's a special x. And so when you go to plug into vertex form, it's x minus h, so x minus a negative 2, it would have ended up being positive as well. Any other questions?
What was our grade on our work?
What?
What was our grade?
In the end, we got 100%. I just had to start ignoring some and start listening to others, so. All right. No, we're not judging. Stop judging. Homework number 11 is due tomorrow, but do you guys want to keep playing with your worksheet? Because it's due, tomorrow also. Sorry, I didn't write it up.
With the worksheet.
The tests are mostly graded. I did a lot of it at the volleyball game last night. Oh, she got stuck outside before. Mrs. Batch wants to see you, Eileen. You can go now. I'm on the long answer of the back page. And I'm pretty sure, just so you know now, possibly because of time, possibly because of lack of studying, almost all of you really didn't like at least one of the long answer problems that was worth 8 points because it's double the multiple choice, which is worth 4 points each. So I think I'm going to, instead of building in a bonus, which I usually do, I'm just going to go ahead and take out your lowest long answer, the one that you missed the most points on. I'm going to disregard it in the score. And if you aced all the long answer, I'll give you +4 on your test. So we did figure that out last night. I figured that out last night. For some reason, you guys just didn't like the long answer.
I think we didn't have our time, that's what it was.
Maybe. That's why I'm going to knock one out. Kiddos. On these two.
It's not from Paris.
No.
Pause, coming back. 6 and 7. They're not really horrible. They just are a little bit trickier. Except, actually, number 6 is really easy. Question, how do I complete the square in number 6?
Can you take -2 out?
I could take a -2 out, but I actually don't need to. Because what could I write and be done? What could I write and be done?
X plus 2.
-2.
Minus
4? Wait, what?
Why 0?
There's
There's nothing there, but it's already good because it's a -4. There's my A, there's my K, and it's just a 0 on the inside. What? Mind blown. It was already done.
So is the 0 necessary for writing it?
Well, you need your vertex, and so if you didn't know the 0, would you have been able to do the 0, -8? I don't know. Good question. Anyway, there's more to answer on that one, but it is what it is. Question, why is number 7 going to be hard for some of you?
Fraction.
Ooh, what do you have to pull out?
Fraction. Oh.
Now that's easy from this guy, but pause. It's okay, we're working together, safe place. What's going to be left with the x term when I pull out a 1/2? What times 1/2 is 2? You divide by a 1/2, which means you multiply by the reciprocal. Check it, isn't 1/2 times 4, 2? But wouldn't that have been a little weird when you saw it tonight? Now do you keep on going with your process?
Yes.
You're gonna have to put something there and then put something there. What's weird about the very last section of the worksheet? Ooh, word problems. For 8 and 9, what kind of functions do you see? Quadratics, right? And what are they asking? I want you guys to underline really quickly. What are they asking for in each of them? The maximum height, and guess who the height is? The maximum y. They just want you to find the max. Kiddos, how do we find the max of a quadratic? Either complete the square or use -b/2a. Can you find me the max value without a calculator?
Yes.
Ooh, I think so. You're going to have to try that. Go ahead and save for me really quickly. Circle 10, circle 11. Skip those two tonight. But, pause. In order to skip 10 and 11, you have to do 8 and 9 by hand. Have fun. See you guys later. Finish up 2.1, Fabric in the book. And I've done, we've done, you've done most of the worksheet already. Skip 10 and 11.
This is a long neck.
Don't even listen. name. So it's
The Quran was not written.
After when no, you know why I would be hesitant about that? That was in somebody else's grandma's team. I'm dirtier than they are for the
Can I see my test read or do I have to wait?
I know enough that people, like in general, people's back pages are bad, but I don't.
My back pages were bad, I didn't have time.
I know. Nice thing is, though, I'm throwing out one of them, which will help.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Have a good day.
Thanks, bud. So, yeah, so we're lost on 81, I'll say okay on 68, we're lost on. Okay. And then number 10. Oh, that's okay. That didn't let me work. Okay, why I'm marking that one out is because that was your grace problem, so I'm gonna make this one your grace. So you get 1 grace 1. These ones I'm saying you sufficiently did, so you only miss 1/4. So that'd be 4 3/4, which means. Is that the only place you missed it?
And then, oh, right here. This one here. That one I just wrote
The wording too.
yeah, I didn't.
Oh, and then 50 was saying. 54. But this one, actually, that was right, because that was the formula. I don't think you had to solve for that one. So we say okay on that. That was a grace one. I think part of it too is that you're missing some of your directions, so they didn't know what you were supposed to do. So like if it was like translating words, they're like,
What's Trinity Cal? It's a bounce back.
solve, then so they didn't.
Do so much better, yeah.
Let's go ahead and just make it those two, which would be. That's what it is. I think they thought that was all 4. So out of half point. So it would be half point and a whole point, which would be 50. This is something.
I know, I always think like the door's locked and this dude's just sitting in there with other students, locking other people out.
You know me, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I only do that if I'm praying for someone I'm there sharing about something private.
Wait.
There's no more. There's no
And available, right after I write down her grades, if I don't write it down. Okay, one second.
Can I ask you for a letter of apology?
Yes, you can. I need you to make sure that
some, Jason.
they are.
Look, I got some.
On that list.
Oh.
It lists it so I can go through.
Yeah.
Make sure your deadlines and everything up to date as far as what colleges you're doing.
Yeah.
And then resume, whatever thing
Yes!
you want me to consider. I don't put
So
everything in
much.
the resume down, I
2
include
drops
it.
of
I include it. So make sure anything you want me to consider is in there, like updated. Does that make
Alright,
sense?
so resume and.
Have been requested or
Okay,
what's
okay.
on there complete. Maybe you can do that, I don't remember, Alan.
Alright, I'm gonna go ask
Thanks, Ben.
during lunch, while I'm gonna go.
So yeah, you find, was it MC? MG minus CA. And so it was defining that this was MCG. And then he was wondering where A was coming from, and that was because it's MC of A, yeah, which is that.
Well, the force of this.
Yeah,
Which is that
which would
expression.
be added together.
Yes.
The tension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then the
was
other
it, no, I think it was